Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and welcome to Friday Conversation, episode 78. 78. Thanks, everyone, for coming. So we'll hope everyone's having a great week, and we'll go around the room to introduce everyone, and then we'll get on to it. So, Chris, will you kick us off, please?
Hello, my name's Chris Mohan, sometimes YouTuber, sometimes appear in Friday Conversations and other conversations on Steve's channel. And here for another Friday with another group of friends and people. Yay.
Yeah. And Carl.
I am Carl Albert, pen name Carl D. Albert. I just self-published my first fantasy novel, Truth or Crowns. I'm actually wearing a little t-shirt I printed out for it. And that was, in fact, intentional. I'm so good at marketing, you can tell. But I'm in SPIFBO this year, self-published fantasy blog off. Anxiously awaiting the first reviews to come in, and really excited to be joining just a really wonderful community here. I had followed Steve's YouTube channel for a while, and glad to kind of wander my way into this community.
Welcome.
Yeah, for sure.
Glad you can make it. Good to see you. And our friend Paromita's here. Paromita, will you give us an introduction?
Yes. Hi, I'm Paromita. I like to read books, fantasy, science fiction, general fiction, classics, mystery, failing at historical fiction mostly. And this is my first time on a Friday Conversation episode.
Yes, I'm glad you decided to join us.
Hooray!
Yeah. We'll go easy on you. We'll make sure Layla's nice to you. And Layla, will you give us an introduction?
I'm Layla Goushey. I'm a poet and writer, professor of English, and I'm sometimes editing a literary blog, I guess you'd call it, called Ballady Magazine.
Nice. And Varsha.
Hi, my name is Varsha. I run a tiny YouTube channel called Reading by the Rainy Mountain, where I like to talk about my favorite books and also have conversations with people about books I like.
Did she freeze or?
Everything
froze.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, did you lose me or did I lose everyone?
Both, I think.
Yeah, I think both.
Okay. I don't know how much of that intro you caught, but Reading by the Rainy Mountain, that's all I have to say.
Glad you can make it, Varsha. So, Carl, tell us about your books. Tell us all about it. What can you tell us about it?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. It's an epic fantasy, definitely on the darker side, Truth of Crowns. It's the first book in the Ash Eternal, which is currently planned to be around a 5-book series. Mine end up being 6. I try as I might to outline, I never stick to my outlines, and I am very much flying by the seat of my pants. I just find that the characters kind of inevitably, I'll bump up against something in an outline that, a character it just doesn't feel right for them. It's like, that's not what they would do, and then things steer off in a wildly different direction. Anyway, though, the book in question is really, I kind of pitch it as a classical tragedy, kind of in the Shakespearean or the Greek tragedy mold. It's structured as such. It's about these 4 individuals who pursue love and power and end up crossing each other's paths and end up stumbling, all of them, into a vast conspiracy, a great political conspiracy between competing parties, vying for different thrones and also for their ideals and their version of what they believe an ideal society is. And I guess that's sort of a broad pitch of what book 1 in the series as a whole really is about.
And what was
5
the name
books.
of it again?
Truth of Crowns.
Truth of Crowns. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And
This
that
is
your
the cover.
cover?
It's kind of, you can kind of see it,
Alright.
the little eye there and everything. Yeah, no, it was awesome. I had AP Canavan. I was lucky enough. I worked with him. He edited my book, and he was amazing. For those who don't know, he's a critical dragon on YouTube, and he worked on the number of the Malazan books and He's super good. Nothing but praise, and he definitely improved the book a lot too. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to reading it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
When did your idea for the book start? When did the spark begin you say, I'm going to write a book? Like, when did that happen?
Yeah. So I guess in the broadest sense, I've really always told stories. Like I was playing sort of like imaginary games longer than a lot of kids did. And I started writing when I was like 11, 12. I started writing fan fiction, like anime stuff to begin, and superheroes. And then, I was always reading fantasy novels, which is for some reason that wasn't what I was writing. And then I went off to college. I went to film school, actually. I went to the University of Southern California, where I studied screenwriting. I actually work in the entertainment industry. And while I was there, I just was like really tired of screenwriting. I was tired of the form and a lot of kind of the requirements that are often imposed upon you, especially in film school. And so I wanted to write a book. And I had just gotten back into reading novels, especially fantasy novels. American Gods was kind of my entryway into adult fantasy. And Game of Thrones was sort of another part of that. And so my initial idea was like, I want to tell Game of Thrones like that type of story, but in like a Renaissance setting. Like I thought, a lot of people aren't doing that. I mean, I was wrong. Actually, people have written in a Renaissance setting. Lies of Locke Lamore, I read shortly thereafter, and I was like, okay, well, this is like clearly Venice. Like I'm out to lunch. And so I had to adapt, and on top of that, as I started writing, like I said, I kind of created a rough outline, and it just very quickly veered off. And one of my ways to kind of try to make my work stand out and feel unique was to put a lot of myself and my lived experiences into the work. So there's actually a character who has a couple disabilities that I have lived with. Like as I was born, and I almost died on the day I was born. I had life-saving surgery that 100 years ago did not exist. And so I kind of wanted to, like, my idea was like, well, how would a character with a similar thing survive in, a setting where the technology is so much more primitive? And, I'm not going to get into details, but needless to say, the spoiler involves, magic. And that ended up creating not just one, but many plot lines, and helped develop the world from there. And then sometime during all of that, I was like, I was thinking like, wouldn't be interesting. I really like stories where like it feels like anyone can die at any time, not even just talking about, Game of Thrones is an obvious example, and there are a number of fantasy series that really lead into the stakes in that way. But even going back to like, I was a fan of like Joss Whedon as a kid. And Harry Potter, and it's like, certainly a lot of the main characters like end up sticking it out, but there are like, those series are not, like Buffy is not afraid to like kill off, beloved side characters and things like that. And that was something that I wanted to translate that, but maybe, play with it a bit. And so I thought, I looked at like Shakespearean tragedies, which I'm a big Shakespeare nerd. And I studied him in a couple classes in college, and I was like, okay, so what if I like start this story and I tell you, this character is going to die. Everything is going to fall apart, and you're going to watch it all happen. And then from there, I kind of really got the whole structure for the first book and for the story as a whole, and all these pieces started coming together. And over 6 years, including really during the pandemic, I've been writing off and on in college whenever I could. The pandemic hit, I graduated into the pandemic, and I was like, okay, I have a lot of free time right now. I am going to like really pursue this really hard. And the rest is kind of history. I wrote the book, I wrote several drafts, rewrote it. I have a writer's group who gave me my first critiques. And then eventually I found my way to hiring AP, who I discovered through Philip Chase's channel and through Philip mentioning that AP had edited his books, and yeah, the rest is history.
That is fascinating, and it actually made me think of a question, because now that you've gone through all of that, we there's always so much discourse around how a book has been adapted for film, some of the stuff that's going on now even. And so would you want your book, since you have some expertise now in both sides of that, would you want to have your book adapted for film, knowing what you know about the whole process?
The short answer is yes, because it would pay really well.
That's true.
It's like you're in good. I mean, one, if you get something adapted, it means you've probably sold really well to begin with. They don't really adapt obscure things. But so that, I'm not gonna lie, there's the financial aspect. I'm a struggling writer, trying to make a career in Hollywood and in books, and so I absolutely, for that alone, would do it. But on top of that, I think, I think given my experience and hopefully the trajectory of my career, I would be able to be involved, which would certainly help, that I feel like I could steer it. I also know that, this is something I actually talked about with AP a lot while we were editing my book, was just how I think a lot of common expectations around adaptations in fan circles are not necessarily, they don't have the same perspective as someone inside the industry, right? Because they don't understand the limits and what you're dealing with, whether it be with executives or trying to appeal to an even broader audience. I'm sorry if you guys hear anything. There's a really loud car driving by, playing music. Anyway, and so I in response to a lot of the recent adaptations, I think I, more than maybe your average viewer, am sympathetic to a lot of what goes wrong in them. I mean, I also just I think it helps that I fundamentally view adaptations as a different thing than the source material. When I watch an adaptation, it does not affect how I view the source material. And so, one that I will go to bat for is the Wheel of Time adaptation, which I think has gotten a bad rap. And I'm a fan of the book series. It's not my favorite series. And I think the adaptation has plenty of issues that you can discuss, But I think it's a lot truer to the source material, particularly the spirit of the source material, than some of its critics might argue. And so in that way, I guess what I'm getting back to your question is I kind of understand how difficult things are and the requirements therein. I look at a book series like A Song of Ice and Fire, and early on, I think a lot of people, speculate it's because George worked in TV, but it translated really well into TV, particularly an HBO TV show where you had, all the sex and violence and, these really great dialogue. And then a series like Wheel of Time where it's a lot of inner monologues. It's a lot of description of people's clothing. It's a lot of walking around on journeys, which you can only do so much before it starts to be, really repetitive on screen and arguably repetitive in the books. Certainly that's a criticism of particularly the early books in the Wheel of Time. And I think, and then there's just the sprawl of it. And then that was an issue that Game of Thrones faced, eventually, is with books 4 and 5, is suddenly you doubled the amount of POV characters. And so, Dan and Dave had to cut them in half. And, I think some of their choices were mistaken. I'm certainly someone who is extremely critical of the last couple seasons of Game of Thrones. I think it just completely went off the rails. But I think I'm also sympathetic to the struggle of it, and so wouldn't be against having my own work adapted. And the strange thing I'm working on book 2 right now. I was actually working on it right before I hopped on this podcast, rewriting the prologue, and I'm finding something that George Martin talked about, where he, I don't know if you all know this, but between A Storm of Swords, or after A Storm of Swords, there's supposed to be a 5-year gap, right? And age up all the characters, and I think it was primarily because there are a lot of kid characters, and kind of unbelievable to believe 11, 12-year-old Arya is going around assassinating people and stuff, So I think that was the original intent, but he found that events accelerated things such that he had to like keep going. And I think that really lends itself to a TV show, you know, because time breaks are hard. And I'm finding actually in my book, I originally was planning like the Dune series, which is another one of my big inspirations, to have big like multi-year like time skips between each book. And I'm finding, at least between book 1 and 2, that I can't do that I'm picking up almost exactly where book 1 ended, just because it's like, oh, there's so much I have to resolve, and it would be really cheap to not do that in the next season, which I think would actually lend itself to a TV show where, you know, you probably are not going to want, because you want to keep the same actors, you don't want to have characters like age up a lot off screen. So sorry, that's a really long-winded, convoluted answer to what you're asking.
That was great.
No, that's very interesting, and I agree with everything you said, especially about Wheel of Time. I'm a fan as well, and I'm okay with the changes they've made. But I think what they did, the best thing that they did was the casting, because that helps carry along a lot of some of the other details that are getting glossed over, you know. But I thought they really hit the mark with the casting. So
Agreed.
excited for the next season. But
I'd be the dissenting voice to say I absolutely hate so much of that adaptation. It's untrue, and it really comes down. It really comes down to the fact that it'll be the same for anybody. When you read a book, the non-negotiables for you as the reader change from person to person.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? The things that I think, oh, these are the things that are really important to this story, are not the same things that Varsha or Carl or anybody else will do. So when anybody's watching that adaptation, it's supposed to satisfy everybody, and it obviously can't. Like, it's an impossible thing to do.
Yes.
And so the things that I would take as the non-negotiables for Wheel of Time are some of the things that changed. Some of the other things, like, yeah, okay. Thing is, I watched it and I sort of enjoyed it, because, like, how rare is a fantasy adaptation happening on screen anyway? So
Absolutely.
you've got to take out what you have out of it, and then kind of go on and go, right, well, that's maybe the things that I really want will kick in further down the line. Maybe that's the important resolution of the excitement that comes for the reader, and kind of hope on hope. But I can still be annoyed, the wrong word, just mildly disappointed that the story that I want to tell is not the story that I'm seeing.
I just want to jump in to say very quickly, I don't want to hog any more of the mic time, but
No, go for it.
No, it's very interesting.
I totally agree with you, and I think there is I think it's perfectly normal and fine, you know, to dislike an adaptation and to dislike it for whatever personal reasons you have. And I never want to press back against anyone just like having an opinion or anything. Any sort of, you know, when I was talking about like it getting like an unfair rap, I think a big part of that is just, I think the vitriol around the conversation, you know, is something that, I mean, even with like Rings of Power, you know, like I was just like, I thought it was like, okay, like I didn't think it was great, but you know, like I just, there's so much like hyperbole. I mean, frankly, on both sides, really, like, you know, of an argument that it's like, okay, can we all just like treat each other, you know, respectfully? And I love, you know, I mean, that's a thing that a reason why I gravitated toward Steve's channel and like all the people that have been on your channel and stuff. And I will absolutely check out y'all's stuff too, is just the kind of level-headed, like, you know, discussion. I think is just so refreshing on the internet, you know?
Yeah. True. Yeah.
I think that's something we talk about when we're doing our discussions. I often say my favourite part is that somebody loved the bit that I hated. You know, because it does show that it wasn't poorly written or it wasn't kind of bad. It just didn't work for me, but completely worked for somebody else. And I take great solace in that, insofar as that's a taste thing, or that's a, you know, whatever way I was feeling that day or reading it or something. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I feel like it's just sharing perspectives, and sometimes I kind of change my opinion. You know, I mean, if I hear a good argument for why, you know, maybe a character wasn't as I thought, or vice versa. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Seems like, oh, you know, one thing I would say, I think part of the whole issue with Game of Thrones was that the books are unfinished. So if you're like a reader, you know, some of those characters are still alive in the books.
Right.
And so like, wait a minute, you know, Um, yeah, and so if you're, so that goes with any other, I think, books that we're reading. If you're getting that world from a book, then that always seems to be the, or at least for me, like the foundational position of the story, and probably for most readers too. But yeah, so but with say Wheel of Time, hopefully there's only one conclusion they can come to. And Raging Power, I just saw it as like a fun show to watch. I mean, it wasn't that deep, and I knew it wasn't trying to adapt an original text, except for some, resources that they had. So I don't know. So I enjoyed it.
And we spoke, I think, last week or so about The Witcher and how, Carl, you were mentioning how studios can come in and change the creative process. How often does that happen for any series?
A lot. I mean, a lot. Especially, I think a thing I commented in the thread you're talking about was that often the more money that's involved in the project, the more interference it'll have. So, that's why you see these blockbusters that end up feeling very samey, is because they're having to appeal to 100 different, people who have a stake in the game. And it's frustrating. It's difficult. Some people are better at balancing that than others, I think you definitely see, and certainly it varies depending on the company too, right? Like there are projects I know of at like Netflix, for example, that I know didn't have a lot of interference, and there are others that had like dozens of people unrelated, like not in the writer's room, giving notes. I do know that, like for example, because it's been quoted, going back to the Wheel of Time, that Rafe Judkins, the showrunner, talked about how he had like hundreds of notes on the pilot episode alone, or like maybe even like thousands. Like it was some absurd number, and I'm sure he was like slightly exaggerating, but like when you're in that Hollywood atmosphere, like like you're getting like everyone's notes, everyone's assistants' notes, like just everything. It's crazy. Like it's absolutely absurd, and so it's a lot harder to get kind of a distilled down, like quote unquote, like authorial perspective through the editing bay. And I think it takes a certain mindset to be able to handle that. And that's not to say there aren't people who get things through without a lot of interference. Like an example I gave in the thread was Guillermo del Toro, who I've heard speak and say that he doesn't take any notes now. And I think it's partly a success thing. I mean, a big part of success thing. Although a number of his movies, especially recently, haven't made all that much money. So I think some of it is also just like maybe budgeting. I don't know. It's all a political game, really. Like you gotta, you gotta play the Game of Thrones, and you win or you die. And that's Hollywood, baby. It's there's no like one size fits all answer to this, because it does vary a lot. But certainly a good rule of thumb is the more money invested in things, and all of these fantasy shows are going to have lots of money invested. These are not cheap shows to make. They're going to have a lot of hands in the pot, and that's can be really difficult. And I think it's an underlooked aspect of it. Like I think there are specific aspects of the Wheel of Time story, the way that season 1 was adapted, for example, that you could directly look at and be like, this was added because some executive didn't think that the book would translate, that they had to do a thing, they had to like, and sometimes it's to, I think, a show's benefit, because sometimes, you can get very much stuck in the weeds of like what a story is, and it's nice to have kind of an outsider perspective, but oftentimes it leads to watering down the source material, definitely.
I've been watching The Witcher with interest because I think at a base level, I think they've misunderstood what that show was, which was a Monster of the Week show. For an awful lot of people, the overarching story, I don't think, like for me, people are sitting here, it might matter, but for the actual bulk of people that were going, it was a Monster of the Week show, and as soon as you take the monsters out and put in an overarching story, people are like, I don't care. It's not, and then they start to critique and go, it's hard to follow. I didn't follow it for 2 seasons here, and now you're asking me to follow it, and it's like, right, okay, because that's certainly my wife, and she has read the books, but just still like wants to see the monsters, wants to see the swordplay, wants to see the costumes. You know, that's what that show is for them, and to kind of turn it and spin its head into something else, and then blame the audience. I think you misrepresented it a little bit. The Witcher.
Huh? Oh, The Witcher.
The Witcher.
Oh, yeah.
I agree with you, and I think that actually the monster aspects was one of the things that, you know, having read the books, I'm actually almost done rereading Baptism of Fire, and I don't know why I'm rereading the books, because I don't love them that much. I like the short stories, but I don't know. They have their moments, but like I think I commented something like it's a lot of people expositing stuff that happened off screen that was much more interesting than, you know, what they're actively doing on screen, and it is a strange, you know, I don't know. I'm sure there are Witcher fans out there. Like, if anyone's listening and like really loves the Witcher books, I'm sorry. Like, this is just my point of view. But I'm with you. I think the monsters was certainly, you know, because it's not just the monsters. It's like the remixing of the fairy tales and like the thematics going on there. Like it is kind of I don't know, to me more interesting than a lot of like what feels like very convoluted and even sort of generic politics going on. That's just like, it's just not on the level of some of the other, you know, political fantasies, and certainly they, I think, didn't make the best use of some I think really talented actors. Not least of which obviously is Henry Cavill. And yeah, I'm with you. I think if the show was a little more monster focused, it would probably be more interesting. Certainly more consistent. But they're trying to, they're doing a weird dance where season 2 is nothing like the books at all. And now season 3 like tried to bring it back around, but I don't know. It's all over the place, that show.
Yeah, I am a fan of The Witcher, but I admit it's a hard read, and it's not. And I think that's probably some of this problem. You can't just sit there and read The Witcher and come away. It's not a light read.
Right.
It's complex and confusing, and I had to read through it twice to figure some things out. But definitely, again, it's everybody's opinion, but I don't think that gives them the, right, I guess, I don't know, to completely go off of the story. And one of my main issues where I just decided to not watch anymore was the mischaracterization of Yennefer, and we can go into all of that, but they kind of skewed Yennefer's values and ethics, and I was like, well, there's no fun in that anymore, because what attracted me to Yennefer was that she did have a core ethic about and issues around motherhood and all of that stuff, and they kind of broke that. So I just said, if I want to see Yennefer again, I'll just read the book again. That might take a while because I've got so many other books to read. So. I think my comfort read right now, I'm rereading Gardens of the Moon in preparation for Varsha's relaunch of the reading of Canavan. And but it's become a comfort read for me. I listen to it a little bit every night, and it's really my third read through, and I'm finally starting to put things together, and and so it's comforting. I can't explain it. It's a weird feeling, like, okay, now I know these characters, and he really is getting at something deep, in my opinion, and so
Totally agree.
Speaking of tough text, that's one to hang in there for.
Absolutely.
I agree with that. Yeah,
it all comes together in the 10th book.
Stop it.
Varsha, did you finish the?
I'm not even kidding. I'm only half kidding. I'm on the 10th book right now. And okay, I love the books. I do, with a deep passion. I started my YouTube channel so I could talk about the books. So I say this with as much love as possible. It all comes together in the 10th book. Until then, it did not make sense to me. I did not understand what was going on. I just, enjoyed the little sections and pieces. So.
But are they a comfort read? I don't think I've ever heard Malazan ever talked about in terms of a comfort read.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. It isn't for me. I wouldn't, because I need to be involved. I guess it depends on your definition of a comfort read. For me, a comfort read is something like a popcorn read. I guess I like to watch rom-coms when I don't want to think too much about what I'm watching. So that's the kind of book I would call a comfort read for myself. But is familiarity maybe something that makes something a comfort read for you?
I think it's a familiarity of the characters. And Paramita, I wonder, have you read Malazan?
I have, but I would rather not talk about it.
I know.
I have read all. I have read all 10 books.
Oh.
Yes.
Paramita, I need you. Because these people are trying to talk me into something I don't really want to do right now. And, and I need somebody to at least give me a balanced view, because I'm only hearing one side of the argument.
For something which is so beloved to so many people, I don't feel right to say what I felt.
No, you should. No, absolutely, you should.
No, speak freely. Yeah, Chris and I talked yesterday. We encourage your hot takes.
Absolutely.
Fire away. Yeah, you're safe. Let's hear it.
I don't see any reason why this was as beloved as it. None. Like, not the writing, not the characters, not the world building. Why? I was hitting my head on the wall with the first book, and I hit my head on the wall with the 10th book. And on some level, that is sad to me, because I obviously something which is very beloved by a lot of people completely eludes me. But I have read the 10 books within the limit of my reading comprehension, and I'm sorry, I don't see I don't see the appeal. I'm sorry.
That was an afternoon for you?
I was just gonna say, I'm impressed you stuck out all 10 books. Like, that's a huge commitment.
Yeah.
So this is not a very positive thing which I did at all. I should have stuck to my initial decision, which was to stop after the second book. But then a lot of people said that if you try the third book, and then it comes together. And for me, it still didn't. And then they said that, you start to see the reverberations in the themes in 5 and 6. And so I said, okay, I will try this, and I will try. And it was an experiment. It utterly and totally failed.
Paramita, I have a lot of respect for your opinion, because you ask the best questions and you notice, such important details in the books we talk about. And I just wonder, do you work with literature? Are you a writer, or have you taken literature courses, or?
Never.
Yeah, you just really have a knack for getting, to the essence of some books. So definitely.
Very kind of you to say.
Yeah, definitely.
I have a hot take on adaptations as well, but I'm going to keep quiet.
No, please.
No, come on, tell us. Yeah, far away.
Hot takes make the world go round.
I thought the Wheel of Time show was really, really disappointing. The Rings of Power show was insulting.
Insulting?
I'm insulted. I want to cry. I actually cried, I think, at the end of the first episode, and not for a good reason.
Oh no.
A particular character jumps into a water body to swim to a particular destination, and I wanted to jump with that particular character.
That's
I'm
valid.
sorry. I'm sorry, Rings of Power is not Tolkien. I'm sorry.
It's not okay.
And no, okay. I am not some, world-building aficionado, and I cannot quote Middle Earth or Legendarium lore like some of my much more well-read friends can. But if you have read even Hobbit or even Lord of the Rings, how? I cried. I'm literally crying thinking about it. I'm going to stop. But on the adaptation part, so I'm just a viewer. I have no idea about the creation part. I have no idea about how things get made, what things get cut, how many people interfere. On the viewer end, I think I'm a bit spoiled because I read the Lord of the Rings books because of the movies. I was at that point in my life when the movies came out. And so for me, for an adaptation, there are three things. First one is fidelity to the source material. Because according to me, if someone is adapting a source material, why would you not try to at least represent its core spirit? Then don't adapt that IP. Like, write your own. That's the first one. Second one, regarding a source material, if it's a book, did it bring in new readers? For Lord of the Rings, the answer is yes. For Game of Thrones, at least first season, I would say yes. It has 2.2 million ratings on Goodreads. I do not think that number is unrelated to the show. Then maybe people dropped off and they realized that, okay, I prefer the TV show and I'm not so much into the books. But I think there was a correlation. Rings of Power, I don't think anybody would want to read Lord of the Rings based on that because it's the appendices. And Silmarillion, they don't have the rights to, but they make these weird allusions. Forget. The Magicians on Sci-Fi was an excellent TV show. Again, motivated me to pick up the books by Lev Grossman. Excellent TV show. They totally went off the rails because, it's 3 books and they had 5 seasons. And book 1 and 2 is parallel timeline. So that was done in 1 season. So they totally changed it after season 2. But it was a fantastic show. And how much of the books they kept fantastically. Dune film, part 1, excellent adaptation. Excellent adaptation. The core theme has been preserved according to me, by the filmmaker of what Dune is trying to do. If you change the gender of the ecologist or something, that doesn't matter at all. But the core theming of the Fremen and things like that, it's on point. Wheel of Time is a tough one. I wanted to read the books after season 1, but I don't think it was because of the show. There's a basic thing. Robert Jordan wrote a perfect prologue, and they had Rosamund Pike narrate something because she's a star.
That's an executive note. I can tell you that's an executive note.
Why would you do that? Why would you destroy that prologue? It is a perfect prologue.
I can speak to this a little bit, actually, because I read the script a year before the episode came out. So I read one of the earlier drafts they shot. I just had a friend who wasn't even working on the show, but somehow ended up with the script. It was floating around Hollywood, I guess. And the original prologue was the foretelling of Rand's birth. Or it's not even like the foretelling because it's happening as he's being born. Which was different than how it was in New Spring, but was at least interesting as opposed to what we got, which I thought was terrible.
Yes.
I just rewatched episode 1, and I think the first half of the episode is really quite bad. I really like the second half. Like, starting from when they start putting the lanterns out, I think it gets really good. And it leaves me feeling so weird because I mean, just the pacing is terrible. I think it was cut to pieces. It literally, we know that it had like an arbitrary, they had to be under this time limit, you know? And I think that really hurt the episode. And then certainly the opening was just awful. I mean, both of their little teasers I thought were just like, the second one felt like something out of Power Rangers, you know, with the blocks, like the boulders falling down and they just like the two guys just like jump back. Like it's just goofy looking. And yeah, certainly that, I don't know what was going on with them expositing all that info that we already get throughout the episode of like who the Dragon Reborn is and why she's searching for him, and it was terrible. And so I agree with you that Robert Jordan wrote like a perfect prologue. It's like it's up there for one of the all-time greats. I don't think Eye of the World as a book is like near one of the all-time greats, but that prologue is legendary and is like a great hook for the series. Hopefully we get it in season 2. We'll see.
We'll see. But no, I mean, I think they butchered it a bit in the beginning of season 8, so I don't think they're going to redo it, but I hope they do. If they do, I'll be very happy. What was I? So, yeah, fidelity to the source material. I'll finish very quickly. Second one is, did it bring it new readers? And the third one, which I think is crucial, as you were talking about Witcher, I was thinking about this, longevity. Will people be watching this in 20 years?
Yeah.
I'll speak to that because I don't think that's ever the intention of Wheel of Time or Rings of Power. It's to generate new subscribers. That's the model for streaming. Actually, they're not worried about retaining viewers at all. They're trying to generate new subscribers because that's what drives shares, etc. in the company. They need something to be bombastic and big, and that's why they wouldn't take a chance. Like Wheel of Time has a Rosamund Pike problem for sure because it's the centre of all the posters, and it sort of subverts the chosen one trope, which is what the whole book is, and that's my main part about it. Like from the thing, but like good adaptations are so difficult. Like I cannot.
Yeah.
I really struggle to think of one that I absolutely love from start to finish. Like I can think of something like The Last of Us, which I think gets about 90% right. But for somebody that loves the source material, that 10% that they miss is so bothersome. It's like, it's so unfair. It's very unfair on the show and the adaptation and the people that are working on it. That kind of idea.
I've not seen it myself, and it's not SFF, but I have heard Atonement was a near perfect adaptation of the movie except one change. But other than that, I have heard that it was a very, very good adaptation. I don't think it has to be 100% or anything like that, but just read the books. Sometimes I see stuff and I'm like, did they read the book? It just reminds me of that, it's a meme now, D&D from season 8, where, you know, they say we forgot. And I'm like, oh, they forgot to read the books. So.
That definitely does happen. There definitely are times where things are adapted by people who don't love the source material.
Yeah.
I will say for Rings of Power and Wheel of Time, the at least the head writers definitely love the source material. I mean, if you see them talk about it, they do care. I mean, you can certainly argue one way or another if they, you know, messed it up. Certainly there's lots of room there. And I personally certainly feel that Wheel of Time got much closer than Rings of Power. My own feeling about Wheel of Time is I felt like that the show was much more of an ensemble from this onset, which is not true in the books. The books is very dialed into Rand. And I personally like that they spread the focus because I thought the book series got more interesting once they spread the focus. But I also understand why, because it definitely changes the tone of Eye of the World. Like the show feels different than the first book, but to me it feels more like the later books, which is why I could get on board with it. That's just my own personal vibe. Rings of Power is weird, where I feel like it almost feels like Tolkien, but like Tolkien fanfic. Like it's like trying to evoke the feeling, but it's not like there exactly. And at the same time, I don't feel like a lot of the movies necessarily get the exact same vibe. I also saw the movies first, and I'm actually a heretic who prefers the movies to the books, except for The Hobbit. The Hobbit book is like way better than the movies. And I actually prefer the Hobbit book to the Lord of the Rings books. Anyway, that's my hot take for the day. But I think that you know, I mean, just because they're more like action heavy and like very much like there's something to the epic poem, you know, kind of styles to the books that I think is hard to translate. But the movies did certainly a much better job, I think, than Rings of Power. Although I didn't hate Rings of Power, I thought it was all right. I just thought my biggest gripe was I just felt like it was kind of boring for a lot of it.
Yeah.
It just kind of dragged on.
Certainly a bit predictable.
I watched it with my book club, but we basically abandoned expectations of it being like Tolkien and just were like, okay, we're watching this. Although we did have a couple of Tolkien experts in the group, and you know, they had things to say, but that's how I approach it as just a new thing because, you know.
Well, I think that's just my opinion is you will enjoy adaptations a lot more if that's how you like go into every adaptation. Is be like, it is its own thing. Like, if you want that 1-to-1 or even like 90% adaptation, maybe you'll get it, but probably not. Like even Dune is missing some really important scenes from the book. And I'm right there with you, Paromita, that I think that's like as good as an adaptation gets. Like it's up there. It made some changes. You know, I think there are aspects of it that are better than the book and aspects that are worse than the book. But I just think in general, a person will be happier, just like if they can find a way to like divorce the two in their head. But I understand, especially if it's something like important to you, you know, a work that's important to you or that shaped you in any way, that could be really hard. Like, God, if Robin Hobb was adapted, I think I would have a hard time with an adaptation.
Oh, love Robin Hobb. Yeah.
But her books should never be attempted because they're very, very literary. You know, a lot of the what's great about that series is in the words and in the again sort of internal monologue and all of that kind of stuff that goes on, but in the characters' heads that can't come out on screen. It just can't. It's impossible.
Yeah.
You would definitely have to make changes. I mean, I think you would have to see. I don't even know. It would almost have to be like kind of slice of life because the books are kind of slice of life.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, and it that would certainly be hard to get Hollywood to give money to that, you know, because it wouldn't be all Game of Thrones, like every episode ends on a cliffhanger sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think the much more interesting question, a bit of you, Carl, actually, since you work on it, if you had mid-tier money to make a mid-tier adaptation, which books or book series do you do? Because obviously people can say, like, around the end, just pick the big things that you're gonna get financed for. But if you had mid-tier money to do and could do a so-so job, what's the book that you think story-wise would make a great adaptation?
I think so. I think you could do the first two Farseer books on mid-tier money. The problem is when you get to the third and beyond, it gets much more fantastical. But that wouldn't be my answer. The first thing that came to mind, I've actually only read the first two books in this series, but the Greenbone Saga, I think you could do with a relatively small budget and not honestly have to make that many changes. It's I think the biggest issue you would have would be the time skips. But I also don't think there are that extensive of time skips until the third book, is my understanding. That's the one I haven't read, is the last one. And so I think in that case you probably could get away, because at that point they've already committed, you know, and if you're on the last one, you can probably get a little riskier, just because it's the end. Like, what are they going to do, fire you?
Well, either the show will be renewed for the third series, which is always the big money increase from the cast anyway, or it won't, you know, at that stage. So it'll either do well. Same for the Farseer books. You could get the first two made, and if it's gangbusters, they'll give you the money for the third.
Right.
You know, regardless of what's going to happen, kick it up, and if not, then so be it. But I do think if we're going to have any success in seeing fantasy adaptations, is that we get some mid-tier adaptations that are actually quite good and celebrated, rather than them all have to be like all the money on the screen. If it's not visually impressive, it's dead.
I'm right there with you. I would like that, and I think that's a problem in Hollywood in general right now. You're seeing is a lot of blockbuster movies are bombing.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to see a lot of budgets dialed back down, and we're going to see more, probably not like way smaller movies, but certainly like not the $250 million budget, like gigantic, which is crazy because a lot of these movies look terrible too, like have the worst CGI you've ever seen. But it's who knows what all goes on behind the scenes. But I think we will see more of that in general, and I hope fantasy gets in on that, because that's been one thing I've been really enjoying, is just that we have more fantasy shows.
Yeah,
like
for sure.
Like that, just the feeling. I mean, that's maybe one of the reasons I'm like softer on like Wheel of Time, for example, is and I do genuinely like the show. I think episode 8 certainly fumbled things, but like, we're getting a fantasy show. Like, this is so cool, We're getting to see channeling on screen. Like, we're getting to see these big locales and, like, the big, like, Age of Legends skyscrapers, like, all grown over. Like, that's so cool, That's everything I wanted as a kid, and that we only got with, like, Lord of the Rings. And all the other stuff was, like, the crappy Shannara show and, like, stuff that just, like, looked terrible. And was, like, it just, like, you cringed, like, every episode with, like, the worst actors you've ever seen, and anyway, I don't want to go too hard on them, but like, it's
so far though.
Yeah.
So you mentioned
Paromita's hot takes are infectious.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say something about the Witcher books, and I wanted to say something about what Chris said about mid-tier adaptations. So which should I do first? Maybe the Witcher book first, because that's what Layla was saying. So one thing which I know, because I'm on a server where there are a lot of European friends, is that the Witcher books in English translation have been butchered. And it is not the translator's fault. What happened was they employed someone who does technical translations. So a lot of the the metaphors and the little folklore and the jokes and everything is lost. And this has not happened in the European languages, because when I've spoken to 2 different people who both have Witcher on their top 10 list. One of them is a friend of the forum, Jolien. So she read them in Dutch, and she said it was fantastic. And I know someone else who read them in German and said that they were fantastic. And I just think that something has been lost in translation. So it's something that is sad to me, and maybe if the show would have done well, they would have like reissued the book. I mean, try to do a translation, but I don't think it's likely to happen from the way things are going. So, I mean, it's very sad, because it's one of the few in SFF or non-SFF. Of course, we have a lot more translated literature, but in SFF, this is one of the mainstream ones, which is non-Anglophone, and it is superbly popular. And it's just very sad to me that we have possibly something being lost in translation here.
That's
There's a
great
solution,
point.
though. Sorry.
That's a great point.
What's the solution?
At one point during one of my read-throughs of The Witcher, I started investigating the names that he gave and to the characters, and one was Jaskier, who is translated to Buttercup in English. But I think in the show, they use the name Jaskier. But so I did this whole deep dive into the mythology of what this name was and everything, and there actually is a mythology behind it in Polish and European history, which about a young man, and I forget exactly what it was, but that more, I think, related to the personality we see in the books, and just his excesses. And we see some of those excesses in the show too, but I'm following up on what Paromita said, that there may be just a more culturally relevant meaning to the name Jaskier that's just going over our heads because we're not, of Polish culture. So that's a great point to think about.
Yoli needs a cape because I think she's a superhero. She can read so many different languages, and she's amazing. Yeah.
Well, that was going to be my solution. Paromita, just a couple more languages is all you need, and then there's more books to read, and I mean, it doesn't seem that difficult to me.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Really helpful.
Oh boy.
What was your other point? Paromita?
Oh, right. So Chris was asking about mid-tier adaptations, and one I really loved, and it's on a book which Varsha has also read, and I know she has loved because she has given it 5 stars, is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. So the BBC have a very nice I think it's a 7-episode miniseries. It's on YouTube. And my God, wow. Just wow. It is so soothing to my heart to see that miniseries and to see the respect for the book and what the book tried to do. There are lots of things in the book that obviously didn't make it through. I mean, there are footnotes and things like that. Lots of little things. But the core element of the book, which is that magic comes alive in England, it comes through in the miniseries, and it's so beautiful.
I agree. That is a great adaptation. I hadn't even thought about that as like a mid-budget fantasy, but that's a wonderful one.
Yeah, I've been meaning to see it and I haven't gotten around to it. I think I wanted to reread the book first, and it's a 1,000-page book, so I've been postponing it. But I do love the book. It gave me like a 2-month-long hangover or something. I couldn't read anything else when I finished it. It was excellent.
So Steve, when are we starting the read-along for Jonathan?
It's right there. Right there.
Oh, nice.
Steve quietly exits the chat.
I'll read it with you again. I have been meaning to reread it.
Yeah, well, a few months ago.
Steve, don't say yes to things.
I'm
This is
trying
like
to get
intervention time.
Yeah.
Varsha, definitely intervention. Steve also on intervention, and Chris is very near intervention. I have to organize interventions for all of you. Way too many read-alongs.
Yeah.
Well, in our defense, I will say that we've been going slow. So we have been, because I used to read 100 pages a day. And now I'm 100 pages a week on some of these books. So it's manageable.
Yeah, but when you do 7 books,
That's the problem. Is like I can manage another 100 pages a week, and then it's like, oh shit, I have like 8 books to read. So now I have to like over 100 pages a day. So it's like, it doesn't.
Oh, I don't mean
But no,
anytime soon, but
good.
when you read it, I will read it with you. When we finish Matterhorn or Baru Commandant or whatever, we'll add it in when we finish one of the things we are already planning.
Sounds good. Yeah. No, I've been wanting to read it. Yeah, definitely.
So, in terms of Hollywood and the direction, they've obviously had a very, as far as I can remember, the biggest summer that they've had in a very, very long time here. And they're either they always, like, copycat is what happens. It's just like American sports. Whenever there's a successful thing, everybody tries to do the same thing. And it's about what lessons they learn from Barbie and Oppenheimer. And that is hopefully not that people just really like 80s toys and 70s toys, but that they trusted 2 really big IPs to 2 really big creatives in Greta Gerwig and Christopher Nolan, and let them do what they wanted in free thing. And I very much doubt that is the lesson that they will learn, because that is, history tells us that is not what happens in this circumstance.
Yeah, history is a flat circle, and Hollywood's just running laps. Like it's. Oh man, yeah.
I remember the conversations about Barbie when everybody was running about going, this can't be any good. There's no way that this is a thing. And I was like, but Greta Gerwig's in charge of this. Like, this is actually really quite big news in film world. They give it to, and she took on this project as a creative. Like, I think all the signs were there that this was going to be wildly successful, because while it'll be a Barbie adaptation, it'll be about a lot of things, and it'll be a cultural yardstick probably because of it, and it's sort of turned into that. For good and for bad, because it's creative discourse.
I haven't seen Barbie yet. How have you? Any of you all seen Barbie?
Mm-hmm.
So, what are your thoughts?
I really enjoyed it. I've heard a range of opinions, but I personally really liked it. I just think it's like really fun. Like I just had a really good time. I know of several women in my life who it was very meaningful and powerful to, but even as a man, I just thought it was like a really good time. And honestly, I thought that the standout actor in the movie was Ryan Gosling. He's hilarious. I mean, he's kind of given the most fun character to play, so that's a big reason why. Like it's just like he has all the best lines, and like he's just so goofy. But it really is, I thought, phenomenal. I thought everyone was, firing on all cylinders. It's a really weird movie, which is not something you see a lot in like blockbusters. Like it has really quirky, strange moments and storytelling choices. And some of the things that I think are more traditionally appreciated in blockbuster movies, like, I don't know, like big plot twists and like logical sort of like rules, this movie almost like operates on like kind of dream logic. Like it's like kids playing with toys, it's like it's crazy. And it does, like, there's a lot about it that doesn't really make sense, but it's like super fun. And if you can just like go along for the ride, I think it's just a really good time. And you'll laugh a lot and like enjoy the musical numbers and things like that.
One of my friends saw it and really liked it. I just haven't had a chance yet, to see it. I saw Oppenheimer. I don't know if anyone's seen that. It was okay. I don't know. I thought it went a little too long.
Yeah.
I thought that the end of the film, the same impact could have been made in a much shorter time period, because at a certain point you do kind of lose the plot at the end, as yeah, and I don't know if everyone's seen it, so I won't give the total end, but yeah.
I heard a bomb goes off.
Spoiler alert.
Jeez, spoiler alert.
Sorry.
I like the first half of it. Yeah.
I think I generally agree with you, Layla. I think I maybe liked it more, but it definitely was too long, and it felt like the movie kind of ended like multiple times. And without getting into like spoilers, like it definitely, I don't know, it definitely was kind of structured in a weird way that there were things you could have trimmed down on, certainly. But that's a common, I was going to say it's a common Nolan problem, but I'm definitely finding that's a common issue with like movies recently. Is a lot of movies are like 3 hours long that don't need to be 3 hours long. I don't know what's going on there.
It's the Marvel problem.
Yeah.
The value for money became that that movie had to be 2.5 hours long for people to get value for money, and as increasingly once you take origin stories out of or fantasy stories or superhero movies, the movie doesn't need to be 2.5 hours longer anymore. Like in the early days when you were doing origin story and then story, 2.5 hours is right. That makes sense. But every time, the last 3 Marvel movies that I've seen, and I've been to see them all in the cinema, so like maybe I'm the problem. I felt this should have been an hour and a half. This definitely should have been an hour and a half, and had it been an hour and a half, it'd have been more fun. That element of fun, which is what this movie should be about, is the thing. Like I watched Babylon recently, which is again way too long as a movie, but it's extraordinary. Like, I think Damien Chazelle, another amazing creative. I can't believe somebody gave him money to make this movie that basically criticises Hollywood for 3 hours 10 minutes and the budget that they did with it, but it'll never have an audience because it's 3 hours 10 long.
I need to see it. I haven't seen it. I'm a big fan of Damien Chazelle.
It's wild as well. It is properly wild. Capital W, capital I, capital L, capital D. A couple of times I go, what the hell? It's so much fun.
I'm excited. I love when stories, movies, TV shows, books, whatever, take wild swings.
Yeah.
Like, I always admire that. The courage it takes to do that. Even if they don't, like, even if it doesn't work, I have to admire, just swinging for the fences. Yeah.
Love that.
I do wonder what the success for Barbie and Oppenheimer is. If it's because it's a big budget movie that isn't a kids movie and isn't horror, that also isn't a superhero movie. So I wonder how much that was appealing for some people who are just, just wanting to get out and watch something different that was still had the spectacle, kind of, Oppenheimer and Bar. It's still like it seemed like had that Hollywood magic kind of thing, but it wasn't superhero related. I wonder if that was an appeal for some people. They just wanted something different.
I think absolutely that definitely played a part. I mean,
go ahead, Carl.
I was just going to say that I think it helps that they know that Chris Nolan gives them that, in a way that maybe some other filmmakers, they wouldn't know what to expect, or they would be a little warier of a biopic. But, Chris Nolan always brings spectacle, even if it's like kind of trippy or weird or like a headier film. Like there's always, as he describes, the audio-visual experience, and I definitely think that played into things, 100%. And it also just got caught up in, lightning in a bottle and like the Barbenheimer thing, whereas like that became a whole thing. Like who that, they just got really lucky and then capitalized on it. And kudos to them.
Yeah. Something that I think was part of the momentum for why we decided to see Oppenheimer was that, we're kind of at a cultural moment now too, where people like Sam Altman of OpenAI are coming out and warning about AI. And so there's kind of this parallel thing of, here are these folks making all these warnings about, the coming powerful machine. And then here's this blockbuster movie about the last time we created this powerful thing, and I'd say with all the conversations I've been in, that was probably one of my subconscious reasons for kind of wanting to make that comparison, really, But
that's interesting, yeah.
Also, I just enjoy history, and so that was why I chose Oppenheimer first, just kind of see a biopic about that. So
this is an interesting parallel. I think people are less likely to push against AI because it helps them in their everyday lives. So it's like, well, AI helped me write my email today at work, so I'm good. I'm good. Like, it's just, so it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Carl, I was wondering. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Paromita. I was going to say nothing of value.
I'm sorry. That's my role. You can't steal that from me. Please go ahead, Chris.
I don't even know if I know what I was going to say now. That's how much value it had. Even I don't remember it.
Should I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Carl, I was wondering if I could ask you a question about your book.
Yeah, of course.
So one thing you mentioned was you wanted to frame it as this Shakespearean or Greek tragedy. And one of the things that a lot of Shakespeare's tragedies and even Greek tragedies have in common is the fatal flaw of the protagonist. Or in Greek tragedies, they call it the hamartia, which brings about their downfall in some way. And I was trying to think of when you started writing this book, is it different people's fatal flaws leading them into different situations, or is it one common fatal flaw, such as a lust for power at any cost, or a lust for supremacy at any cost, which is a common theme connecting all these myriad characters?
That's a really great question. So the answer is a little complicated in that I do think that there is a unifying flaw for them, but it's not necessarily the fatal flaw, at least as I viewed it and kind of wrote the story toward. So like I wrote, there's a main character to this first book, and he's the one that you open the book on and you're told he's going to die, cities are going to burn, chaos is going to happen, you know, blah, blah, blah. Like I open with this little, I have epigraphs. I love epigraphs in books. And so I have epigraphs, and
Same.
The first one in chapter 1 is an homage to Romeo and Juliet, which, you know, has its famous star-crossed lovers. You know, they're going to die, sort of epigraph, or not epigraph, but that's how Romeo and Juliet opens. And I wrote a little homage to that about this main character. And his fatal flaw in the book is really kind of recklessness and like I wanted to kind of play with sort of classic heroic archetypes, and that, you know, things like, you know, I mean, the first example that comes to mind for me is like Harry Potter, where like Harry gets into trouble, but like he doesn't really suffer that many consequences for being reckless. Like the only serious one he does is in book 5. And beyond that, like, he kind of just like gets a little like, oh, Harry, you like, you're always so reckless. Like, what are you doing? You know, and I wanted a character who like actively causes giant problems by being like recklessly pursuing what he believes is right. And I guess that then gets to what I think unites them all is they, in the pursuit of what they believe is like an ideal society, or like an ideal, really ideals, I guess, in a big way, they end up creating problems. And I guess that's sort of the, it's all about sort of these like POV conflicts, and how these people with their very subjective perspectives and their views of the world end up creating massive issues. And the way that like systems of governments, like monarchies, or, you know, basically the idea that like anyone in a position of extreme power, when they make a mistake or they do something bad, the repercussions are immense. And that it's not just like, you know, it's not like cheating on a test, you know, where that like really mostly affects you and maybe the person you cheated on the test with, and like, you know, at most maybe it affects like the curve or something, or, you know, it's like if you choose to avenge someone, like you're a king or a prince or whomever, and you choose to avenge some slight, you know, that leads to war, that leads to death, that leads to, you know, if you invest in certain things and not others, you know, your people starve. And I'm trying to dance around spoilers, obviously, so that's the tricky thing. But I would say in the strictly like Greek like classical tragedy sense, like it's the balance, right, where like they have this fatal flaw that inevitably leads to their death and a lot of things going wrong, but it's also almost like there's like a sort of broader critique too, where like it was almost like they were fated for this, like that, like everything is kind of, you know, that like almost like the gods are conspiring against them, right? You know, whether you think of something like Oedipus, right, where Oedipus Rex is like, Oedipus makes all the decisions that lead to his life falling apart, but he kind of was put in a position where like, how would he know any better, you know, like how would he avoid this? And so that like it's trying to walk that tightrope of you know, you want your character's decisions to drive the plot, but you also want to make it clear that like there are broader, you know, forces
at work,
right, that shape them into who they are and make things happen here. And that's the tragedy of it, really, is like, that's why we pity, you know, the main character of a tragedy, is that like we understand why they have this flaw, even if we think it's ridiculous, you know, even if, you know, Achilles, for example, in the Iliad, spoilers for a many thousands-year-old, you know, story, that like he dies because he's so stubborn, you know, that he won't go out, and he's a little prideful little brat. But you also get it like when you consider like how he was raised and what, you know, the expectations that have been placed upon him, and how he's been lionized and made into this almost like demigod, and you know, and he has been slighted. You know, he refuses to fight in the war because this woman that, I mean, there's a lot of debate about whether he really loves her or not, and she's a slave, which complicates things. But he basically he takes shit personally. So, oh, sorry, I don't know if we can
Yes.
curse or not. But that and then he acts on that, and that's sort of the thing that interests me, and is what I was trying to accomplish. And certainly, again, there's it's again a tricky tightrope to walk, because there's the structure of book one and there's the structure of the whole series. And I would say the series is not necessarily book one. There are tragic elements throughout, and certainly I think the tone of book one continues, but the whole series isn't that sort of Shakespearean tragedy in the way that book one is. Every book kind of has its own structure, at least as I'm intending it. So yeah, sorry, I hope that was, again, a rambling answer.
That was really, really interesting, but unfortunately it made me think of another question, but I'm going to pause and let someone else speak, and then I'll ask my question after some time.
No, go ahead. It's open floor. Yeah, ask.
So I found how you were describing it, that you tell us in the very beginning what happens in very, very broad strokes. Of course, it's more subtle than that. And it was reminding me of a very, very favorite book of mine called The Secret History by Donna Tartt. And that book is essentially a murder mystery framed as a Greek tragedy. It's not Shakespearean, it's Greek tragedy.
I need to look this up. I've not read this. Secret History.
So Donna Tartt employs a similar narrative technique where she tells you in the first paragraph itself what happens. And so it is not a whodunit, which is what murder mysteries usually are, but a why done it. And so it's all on the writing in making the reader complicit as to why the characters went through this process of committing the crime, whether they were destined to, or whether there were, their fatal flaws were amplified by the clique they were in,
right,
etc., etc. And my question to you was, when you're telling us in the beginning what happens, there is a huge weight you're placing on yourself as a writer to keep us engaged throughout the text, because it is essentially that why done it.
right.
So how much of that weight did you feel while writing?
Oh, wow, another great question. That's another tricky one to answer, because I mean the whole process was so long that certainly my feeling in any given part varied a lot. But I mean, I would say overall, speaking to keeping the reader engaged, I'm in the broadest sense, if I am engaged, I believe my audience will be. So I have to write a book that I like. But to speak to this specific issue, I think a lot of what was really key for me it was twofold, I would say. The first was to keep it surprising, that it's still, even though you know what this character is fated for, the path to that can still surprise. There can still be lots of twists and turns, and there are a lot of other characters who aren't named in that opening epigraph who die throughout the book. So I had that added thing where it's like I'm still throwing surprises at the reader. And the other thing which I actually think is even more important and is kind of the fundamental thing is if the reader cares about the characters, then I think they're along for the ride. I mean, certainly the vast majority of readers, I think, read on some level to connect with the characters involved, even if it's just a single character. And that leads to, I mean, it goes back to the idea of like, I need to be engaged. I need to like these characters, or at least feel for these characters. And so making sure that every scene kind of increases that value. And I mean, admittedly, every scene is trying to do multiple things at once oftentimes, but I really wanted to make you feel for this main character, and actually it's interesting you ask that, because for many drafts, I'd have people read it, and he was the character people liked the least because he kept making boneheaded decisions, and they felt like he was too incompetent. And so in actually the final draft, I pulled back, and I actually, this was kind of with AP's help actually, I reworked him a bit to make him still the same character, still the same flaws, and still make kind of the same key mistakes, but to also be more competent, because I think there is something to be said for readers often like reading about people being good at stuff, you know? Like, it's the whole, like, thing of, like, the whodunit, getting to that, is, like, we love watching, I mean, it's a puzzle for us to be like, oh, who do we think did it? You know, here are the clues. But it's also, like, we like seeing a competent detective go through and, like, wow everyone and, like, make justice in an unjust world, and, you know, and on top of that, I think focusing really on the heart of the character, that even with, you know, even if he has maybe a different world view than a lot of modern readers might, just because he comes from a very different society, that you can tell that there is kindness and, you know, goodness in him, and the way that a lot of that comes out is, you know, by having these relationships, and really fleshing them out. Like, I'm a writer who, I love twists. Like, I adore twists. Everything I write has at least one twist, like big twist. Like, I'm a big whodunit fan. Mysteries are big for me. I think that came out of reading Harry Potter. Like, Harry Potter was basically how I learned to read. And those books are all mysteries and all hinge on a twist. But even more important than that for me are characters, and I try to write from a character-focused perspective, first and foremost, that I'm interested in exploring people, and often very messed up, complicated people. And that was sort of, again, getting to your question, was kind of the key, was making sure he was as compelling as possible, but also someone you felt like you could root for, you know, who you could see, you know, all these people that he loves dearly, that he thinks he's working to support them, you know, or he thinks he's making decisions to protect them, or, you know, even in a broader sense, that he thinks he's making decisions to make a better world, a more just world, and then the consequences that come from that, that inevitably lead to his downfall. And I think that, again, another rambling answer, but I think that hopefully sort of speaks to what you were asking about.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I hope my questions were not too intrusive. Please tell me if they are.
Not at all. Not even. I mean, I'm an open book. No pun intended in a lot of ways, especially when talking about writing. It's like my favorite thing to do. Other than like writing, is actually I probably like talking about writing more than I even like writing. But it's certainly a lot more fun after the fact to be like, oh, I did this thing. Like, let's talk about why I made all these decisions. And, you know, as opposed to in the moment, you're like, God, I'm the worst fucking writer in the world. Like, this is terrible. No one's going to like this. And, you know, you grind your way through it and eventually have something that hopefully you're happy with.
So I actually have a proper question. This is unlike me. So as somebody that's read a lot of books, especially different fictions and genres, and said they like whodunits, how aware are you of the fact that as somebody that's done that and kind of, when you do that a lot, you kind of look for the narrative reasons for doing things and therefore solve the crime by the devices of writing rather than actually the story. So in TV, I always say, who's the character that didn't need to exist in the story but has been put in the story, and et cetera, et cetera. So how does that change your writing process? How does that influence your writing process? Do you try and obfuscate it, or do you just kind of forget about it and then...
I am definitely aware of it. Hyper aware of it at times. And actually, I found that I am trying to block out some of that, because I think so much of the best writing often comes from instinct over kind of mechanical, almost like working off of formulas. Even if you're doing it, it's complicated, because like certainly you can come up with like really clever ideas, or like clever reveals that, you know, if you know specifically how to like subvert an audience's expectation, or like, you want to like deconstruct a specific trope or something, you know, that's worthwhile. But it definitely can make things feel a little more mechanical, I feel like sometimes. And it's hard because, you know, like I went through formal training, and so a big part of writing this book was that I wanted to kind of get away from my training to some degree. Like I was so stuck in like traditional Western 3-act structure that I was like, I'm going to write something that I'm not going to outline it, you know, I'm not going to have 3 acts, like I'm going to do whatever. And I ended up bringing it back around to once I discovered the tragedy aspect of it and leaned into that, to the kind of 5-act structure, which coincidentally Shakespeare didn't mean to use. His plays just often fell into it. But we all, you know, if you read it now, if you buy a book of Shakespeare's plays, like they're all in 5 acts. And, you know, it's the same thing with like all the Greek tragedies and things like that. So I am very aware of it. And there are times I wish I wasn't. It is useful, you know, because you often are then good at kind of knowing what the audience is going to expect, or to some degree.
Yes,
I am that. It's weird because, you know, like, you will still be surprised. Like I remember giving the draft I gave to AP, and there were a couple reveals that I was so afraid. I was like, I feel like they're going to guess this like the first time this character is introduced. And he was like, at the end, he was like, I didn't see that coming at all. Like I had no idea. If anything, I think you could foreshadow it more. And I was like, AP is super smart. He's super well read. He knows all the tropes. Like he edits for a living, and he didn't see this thing coming. And actually, if anything, thinks I need to foreshadow it more. And I was like sitting there, I was like, this is so obvious, you know, like I'm like beating the reader over the head. And and admittedly everyone's different, but I think you can get neurotic about it, and I think that's what you have to avoid. Really getting to the core of what you're asking is like, you can't overanalyze things, because I don't know, I'm a neurotic person, and so it's certainly my instinct, and I find it important, and certainly as I've grown as a writer, and as I feel more confident as a writer, that I almost want to get away in some ways from the things I've learned, or at least not try to, you know, not try to write so specifically to something like intellectually, and more let a certain amount of like instinct and emotion take over. Because I think you see that with some writers' works, like, you know, like Carrie by, you know, Stephen King, or like different things where there's something to like early books that has this kind of raw emotionality to it, that I think sometimes gets lost in later works. Or like even you look at Stephen King's books that he wrote on drugs, and like some of them are nonsense, but like some of them like it is one of my favorite books of all time. And I think, you know, that book is too long, but also there's something to like he wrote that book while he was on coke, and there's something to just the wild ideas and the feeling that like he's flying by the seat of his pants, you know, that adds something to it. So I don't know. I don't know that I have advice or like even like any like goal in mind, because it varies, you know. My opinions about these things change day to day, but broadly I try to be, you know, it's useful. It's a useful tool to know tropes and to know structure and to know, you know, to be able to analyze things in like sort of a broad level of what, you know, we call craft. But writing is an art at the end of the day. And I think if you try to distill it down too much, it can lose that X factor. And that's, I don't know. It's a complicated issue. Yeah.
I suppose for me, I always boil it down to the fact the only kind of allegory I have is songwriting, but writing 4-minute songs in a 600-page book are a very, very different endeavour. You know, so I can come up with the idea that as an idea to write, is I'm going to subvert, you know, principles. So rather than writing a 4-bar structure, an 8-bar structure, I'm going to write a 7. Kind of make it work within the thing of a song, and then a song becomes that. Or you write lyrics, a bit like you were saying, thinking, oh my god, if anybody hears this, it's so obvious what I'm talking about here. And then somebody hears it and they say, oh, I know what that song is about. They tell you, and you're like, you're not even in the ballpark of what that song was about, you know. Right. I think it's completely obvious. So I do feel what you're saying in that regard. What's inside your head because you thought of it, the genesis of the idea, the whole way through, you think, oh god, this is too much, you know. I need to pull back from this. Whereas somebody viewing it from the outside is like, no, this is very different.
Absolutely. So you're a musician? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, I don't write for anything other than just personal pleasure and the kind of for the fun of it. Like I'm saying, like kind of you know, these kind of like thought pieces. So classically trained musician, didn't do it as a career, but that's my hobby. You know, that's the kind
awesome.
of thing I like to do. So. Especially as therapy, you know, when you're feeling really crap and down, that's the time when you need it most. So you really lean on it at that stage, you know.
I feel that writing is very therapeutic for me. Yeah. I found when I'm not like stressed about a deadline or something, you know, it's definitely an outlet and a way of like processing the world and feeling emotions, you know. Art's good for that.
Well, it looks pretty good. While I was listening, I actually downloaded your book on Kindle, and I did a scan of the first couple of pages, and the prose is just really nice and tight and clear and
thank you.
Just inviting, you know, the names of the characters. So yeah, so now it's on a to-be-read list.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Prose is definitely something that matters a lot to me, and I think it doesn't, I don't know, it's a weird thing where I think a lot of readers don't care, but it's definitely, that's a compliment that I really appreciate. And that is its own balance, because you don't want to be too flowery, but, you know, you want to be accessible, but you also want to have a level of, like, I don't know, beauty and lyricism, and like the rhythm is so important. That's where instinct comes in, right? Is I find that so often, you know, there are all these rules about prose, but I think so often it's about feeling it, and like you feel when it's right or wrong. Like I'll write a page and I'll be like, this is like I can feel the sentences that are off, you know, like the rhythm of the words is wrong, or the specific word choice is wrong. And it's more than just like, you know, two synonyms, you know, that mean roughly the same thing. It's about like, I mean, sometimes it's about the specific meaning of the words, but sometimes it's just about the feel of them or how they sound. And I don't know, it's an important thing to me. Anyway, that's another X factor.
Yeah. And, you know, that is a thing I've noticed that, I mean, I'll try to, there's certain books where you need like a chapter to get into the writer's style, I guess. And, but yeah, I've noticed not everyone wants to stick that out, I guess, or wait that long. And so, but yeah, definitely it looks great. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I thought of a book question.
Yeah, oh, sure. Go for it.
But it's for everyone.
Amazing.
So, full disclosure, I thought in case this will be a disaster, let me at least look up Carl's book and prepare one or two questions so I can say something in the Friday conversation.
I love this improv game. This is good. You're keeping me on my toes. I don't know what's coming up next.
So I read your Amazon.com page, and I wanted to read the sample, but Amazon was being Amazon.
Yeah.
So I couldn't. But one of the things, there's a quote you're inspired by, and it's one which is very dear to me. It's by George R.R. Martin. When he spoke of his magnum opus, he said that he wanted to write about the human heart in conflict with itself.
Yeah.
And so my question to everyone is, what is a book or a series which really personifies or really represents this human heart in conflict with itself? It can be any book or any genre or anything, but it has to be a book or a series, like not other media.
Oh, wow. That's...
Thank you, Paromita. It's always just a very straightforward question that you ask.
I would like to request Varsha, because I feel like I know her answer. I have a guess at her answer.
So, Human Heart in Conflict with Itself, a book that depicts that.
Or a series. A book, a series, anything.
I have to think about that.
I have my answer. If no one else is ready,
Yes,
I
go
would love
ahead.
for anyone else to jump in if they are. But we talked about it earlier. But Realm of the Elderlings, I think that's all it is. That's the
Yeah.
whole story. You know, that's why it's compelling even when not a lot is going on. Honing in on Fitz, who's kind of the main character of the saga in the broadest sense. I mean, certainly of the three trilogies where he is literally like the POV. It's all about, the flaws of this person. They're grappling with their own demons and, his inability to accept himself, really, and accept his place in the world. And in some ways even accept other people as they are. I think that really speaks to the core of it, is like the conflicts we face and, between, having sort of contradictory ideals or, views of the world. I'm so glad you noticed that quote, Paromita. I believe it's originally quoted to William Faulkner, I think is who George R. R. Martin quoted. I could be wrong about that. I want to say it's Faulkner. And I think that was one of the things when I heard George say that like spoke to me, that I was like, oh, that's why I love your books. One of the reasons, but certainly like the core, and is what I want to write about too. And so that was my little like tip the hat, certainly to him. But yeah, Realm of the Elderlings, 100%.
I quickly looked up my Goodreads list so I can figure out my answer. I haven't read The Realm of the Elderlings yet, but it's on my list. I think my answer is probably The Wars of Light and Shadow. But I think just the way the narrative is framed, the characters are made with, for spoiler reasons I won't say, but I think most of us have read anyway. But for the listeners of the podcast, I wouldn't say why, but I think that probably is a good what's what I'm looking for, example of this. But also, Paramita, I'm curious to hear what you think my answer would have been.
I really thought it would be Malazan.
I mean, I suppose yes, but I don't know. I'll have to think about that a bit more. I don't know if I fully understand what the quote even means, but just at face value, I'd probably say Wars of Light and Shadow.
It's interesting because the quote sort of leans towards character-based novels, doesn't it? It kind of prompts the mind. And when you say, Wars of Light and Shadow, there's an incredibly character-based novel. Farseer, incredibly character-based. I've only read Assassin's Apprentice, and that's my answer as well, because there's something about Fitz's story that just, I'm sort of afraid to read the rest of the series, because that is the perfect book in me. And everybody says it's not even the best book in the series, but it speaks to a young boy that's kind of lost in the midst of this other world, and he doesn't feel like he fits for a whole load of reasons, and other people, for him, other people look at him and think he doesn't fit in a lot of things. And I think a lot of men, young people that were young men kind of growing up, still feel like that. I often think we still feel like the 11, 12-year-old person that we were, even though you may have those more years on the top. You never lose that sense of who you are. And when I read Assassin's Apprentice, I was like, I know how he feels. And so when people do good things for him, etc., it's kind of overwhelming, and it reaches into bits of your heart, etc., that you didn't know you hadn't stirred and hadn't kind of got a part of. And that's why that book kind of frightens me, and how much I like it in terms of reading on, because as a standalone book, it's perfect for me. I kind of like go, okay.
So I just have to jump in to say that Fitz keeps that, like, that's his thing. His entire time is like what you're speaking about there, is he's almost like he's always grappling with that little scared outcast boy. Yeah. And that is so core to who he is fundamentally. I love, you said that so eloquently, Chris, and I think definitely speaks to what makes these books special. And it does, Robin Hobb, I find, makes you elicits emotions that a lot of books don't. Really complex, convoluted. Like, her books are weirdly so comforting to me. Like, I feel like I'm sitting by like a nice hearth fire with like warm cider, surrounded by loved ones, but it's also it's like tinged with melancholy. Like her books just feel very melancholic, and there's a sense of ennui, and it's this weird, contradictory emotional experience that I think is just, it's just beautiful.
That's exactly the line I had in my review of it. There are emotions in this book that are never explored in any other book. Things like pride, etc., are emotions that I don't see in any other book. Yet I feel pride for somebody and with some. Like, I should stop.
Yeah.
Spot on.
Steve's is going to be something really dark and miserable.
Well, I'm looking at my Goodreads list, and I'm like, I just read miserable stuff. I'm trying to find something somewhat positive.
It can be miserable. A human heart in conflict with itself is frequently a miserable experience.
That's
so.
Please say the second. The second apocalypse. You want to say it. Please say it.
I was going to, but is anybody redeemable in that series, though? I mean,
Wait, which series?
maybe Espinette?
Backers.
R. Scott Backer.
R. Scott Backer.
Maybe
I
Espinette?
So I haven't read it yet. I mean, I've read the prologue like twice. I've tried, and I'm excited to get into it for the read through. But I guess my question would be, I don't even know if they have to be redeemable, but do they struggle with their sense of self and their do they have those conflicting ideals? Like if they are, do they make decisions that they then feel guilty about, or that they're unsure if we're right? Or are they like? I think it's about a lot of internal kind of torment and questioning, what's right and your place in the world and everything.
I still miss the series you're talking about.
Oh, Prince of Nothing?
Oh, Prince of Nothing. Oh, I haven't read that yet. Oh.
Yeah, there's some characters that do. Paromita can probably confirm that there's a couple that don't. But I think
just a couple. Just this one person who I was.
yeah.
The moment they came, I was like, please die or go off screen, and they just didn't. And I was very sad with Backer about that.
I sort of love the idea that if Paromita ever released a novel, it'd be the most grim dark novel ever released. Devoid of all hope for some people.
I was trying to think of something not Baker related, so I did think of Mata Zindu from the Dandelion Dynasty.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, Dandelion Dynasty is also beautiful, beautiful.
Paromita, I have a question for you. So what are the characteristics of a successful book in your opinion? Like what are things we should look for that are like foundational for you?
Writing.
The writing.
Sincerity, that's it.
So the writing, like in terms of the characters or the setting, or just
the style. Like if you would give me an excerpt from the author's work and not tell me who the author is, not tell me who the book is, not tell me anything, I would still know that, oh, it's this author.
Oh, okay.
What? So I'm curious. I'm going to push on you for a little more details, because I think Malazan definitely has both sincerity and like a distinctness to the style, and you did not like it. And so I'm curious, what additional factor is it? That is it? I mean, yeah, I don't even know where to go beyond that. But what do you think separates stories for you?
Yeah, because you have great observations, actually. As I write my book, I want to write it according to your style. So, because you do make really good observations. Yeah.
I'm really sorry, but I do not have a good answer. Like I have tried to find a trend or something, but it's literally I have to try the writing sample, or in some case try about 25% or even half the book before I know it's for me or
If
it's
it's successful or
not
not.
for me.
Yeah.
Like someone on a Discord server once said regarding somebody else, they were like, "This person is a random rating generator," and that really fits me because nobody, including me, has any idea what is going to happen until I started the book.
Yeah.
But I'm so sorry. Like I think that the books that I loved, the one thing in common is that they spoke to my heart in some way, and they felt sincere to me. So I mean, I agree with Carl that I mean thousands of readers, probably millions, praised the prose in Malazan, but the writing was not for me.
Right, for sure.
It doesn't capture your heart. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
Especially in the beginning. Yeah.
I sort of feel your pain, Paromita, because it feels like every book I read educates me a bit more into what it is I like about books. You know, I don't know
It
if
is
we can
hard
ever
to-
quantify it.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think I'll constantly be surprised by something, or like often what surprises me is when I don't like something that I feel like I should. Like I'm like this has all the pieces I feel like I should like, you know, like speaking to the Dandelion Dynasty. So I need to give it like a fully fair shot and like read the whole first book, but I had bounced off the first book 3 times, and I think I got as far as like halfway through it, and something about the writing style, like it's hard for me to like fully even like process, you know. The funny thing, we're talking about this, rounding back to The Witcher, I think the translation is a big part of why I struggle with those books, is because it feels almost like it was written, like it has its moments of being, like certainly the vocabulary is pretty broad, and like it has its moments of sounding pretty, but a lot of it reads like a manual, you know, like it has that like rhythm, and I don't know, it's hard to like explain certainly a lot of what it.
But also they changed translator. I mean, it is not the same translator for all 7 works. So I think the Last Wish, which is the first short story collection, is done by a particular translator. Then the second short story collection is someone else. Then for the first novel, they go back to the old translator. And then I think the last 4, at least Lady of the Lake, is by someone else. So I don't think it is necessarily a deal breaker. Like Three Body Problem is like that. Ken Liu did volume 1 and 3,
as well, Paromita.
and I'm sorry, I forgot the translator of volume 2, but I think it read seamlessly. I don't think it's a problem, but maybe it's a problem here because he has used very specific nitty-gritties of folklore, because it cannot be that European readers who are reading it in the language and Polish readers are saying this is a masterpiece, and when we are reading it in English we are saying okay, there must be something missing.
Joel Markinson's the translator.
And that's what I thought
for the second book.
Oh, thank you.
The Grace of Kings does read like a manual. It almost reads like a history book. The rest of
it is, and I mean I agree with. I mean I relate to what Carl said so much, because I started the Grace of Kings and I DNF'd it at 50 or 55%, something like this. And then I was watching this booktube channel, Ponderings of Pete, and he was responding in the comments to me. So I said I DNF'd it at halfway through, and he was like, you DNF'd it just when it gets good. So if possible, try it, carry on.
Everybody always says that about a book. You've stopped reading it. You stopped like just at the very second, and you're like, God damn it.
Because it was within the book. Like if they had said that it gets better in book 2 or book 3, I would have said, sorry, you have to, like, I want to spontaneously read book 2 by myself. But since it was the same book, I kept going and I really liked it. And on a reread also, I really liked it. So maybe it is absolutely not for you, and your opinion won't change even if you push through to the end. But that was my experience, one experience of mine in which my opinion did change when I finished it.
Book 2 is one of my favorite books, though. That's Wall of Storms is so good, so good. So it's worth hanging in there.
Too many books. Too many.
Oh,
books.
you're muted. I do it all the time.
Okay, I'm back. Yeah, I definitely need to give it a fair shot, and it's certainly not an uncommon thing for me. You know, I don't know if this happens to all of you too, but I'm a big mood reader, and definitely if I'm not in the right mood for a type of story, I'll bounce off it and then return to it later. Like, you know, talking about the Wheel of Time, like, it really took me a few books before I was like really into it, and I can't believe I gave it several books before I was really into it. But and even then, you know, there still was like book 11 I think is horrible, but you know, book 12 I thought was great. Anyway, yeah, Dandelion Dynasty. I've heard so many good things. I need to just like stick with it and like really, yeah, give it a shot.
Have you read it, Varsha? Have you read Dandelion Dynasty?
No, I want to eventually. I've put a lot of things on hold until after I finish Malazan, and the time is coming.
You're going to put things on hold when you finish Malazan to restart Malazan.
I was just about to say it.
Well, at that point, it doesn't count as something I haven't played. There's something about. So I have like, I don't know, 18 series or something in flight on Goodreads. It's a lot, and it's actual mental load in my head that I have these many things to finish. But I'm not going to count the reread as one of the things that I need to finish, because that will go on for 4 years, and I'm not signing up for that kind of load. So I will do the reread, but I will read other things besides that I've put on hold since.
Varsha, you have a 15-year friendship committed to here. Are you saying...
Don't forget the Issaman books.
I was going to say, and Erickson has more books.
Yeah. Erickson has more books. And, we have so that's not mental load, though. It's a 15-year friendship, so I'm not counting. So the 15-year friendship, for those who aren't familiar with the concept, is because we're reading the SF Masterworks, one book a month, and there are 160 of those. It's going to go on for a while. So, yeah.
I'm going to die one book short. I can feel it.
No.
My legacy is going to be like, Chris isn't here this month, unfortunately passed.
So close. Yeah.
So close.
So I was doing some math with like compound interest formulae to see how many more books we have to read that accumulate over the next 15 years. So it's plus 60 at least. That'll take some time, and then, you know, eventually we'll catch up. Eventually.
It's good so far. The first two were great. So.
I was going to say we didn't hear Layla's answer to some book really.
Human Heart. You know,
anything which really made you feel like wow.
Well, you know, I was thinking the Poppy War series, and I think that's because I do gravitate, I think, toward female, complex female characters. Like Felison in Malazan, and actually Tavori too, and you know, there's several complex characters in Malazan. Of course, Daenerys, but Rin in the Poppy War series is, I do think, very complex. And what was the phrase someone said? Like works against herself sometimes, I guess, if that's a good way to put it. But so, and in fact, this semester, because of a grant we're working on about Northeast Asia, I'll be teaching with the Poppy War and Kinlu's short story collection, The Paper Menagerie, and The Great Body Problem. So everything we're talking about, so I'll have like this big comparison I can make between all of these characters now, but I'll get to revisit Rin and just find out more about why she's so complex, I guess. But that's why, of course, Robin Hobb, that was one of my first go-to bots as well. But there's so many, it's really hard to just pick one, I think. So.
And speaking of AP, I know we edited Carl's book, but I wanted to give a shout out to Varsha, because on Varsha's new video, AP actually commented and had some high praise. So I thought that was awesome, Varsha.
Yay!
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate that. I've been hyper nervous making those videos, so it's really nice to get some positive feedback about them. So, yeah.
Tell us about the series.
So it's called Bright Threads in the Tapestry. The name of the series is influenced by the Fiona Noir Tapestry by Guy Gabriel Kay, which also happens to be the book because of which I started this series. It has such beautiful writing, and I wanted to go, break it down in detail and talk about it. So, and also, as it happens, I have 2 other series in flight, which I think have excellent writing. Malazan, of course, and The Wars of Light and Shadow. And I have really large highlights for all of them. So I wanted to sit down, and there's connecting themes for several of the highlights that I have. So I wanted to talk about the connecting themes and talk about specific lines and passages that I really enjoy. So that's what I'm doing. Each week I discuss one of a passage from either Fiona Noir Tapestry or Malazan or Wars of Light and Shadow. And eventually the plan is to rotate more books in. And other series that I plan is Discworld and Lavi Tidar's books, Central Station and Martian Science. But that's it. Yeah, but thank you for bringing that up. I really appreciate it. It's been a great deal of fun to record, and it's nice that you're getting an audience. My worry was I'll put it out there and I'll get 2 views on it.
I'll definitely check it out. That sounds really great.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you.
It's
AP comments.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would never be able to do that. No way.
It's one thing to sit and say, oh, I like this book because I like the characters or whatever else is, but to actually be brave enough to kind of say, I like this because, and do sort of even in retrospective or intellectual breakdowns, that's amazing. I've only watched the Curse of the Mistress one, obviously, and it was so good. I actually had a little bit of a chuckle when I heard you read the word brigantine, because we just discussed it actually recently, but it was in that passage that you read out, and I was like, okay, this is nice.
I think we had that discussion. I forget whether we had it before or after I recorded that episode, but yeah. I remember we had a long conversation about it.
So fun.
Yeah, it's really neat.
Also, just want to say very quickly that Human Heart in Conflict with Itself, I swear, describes all of Guy Gabriel Kay's stuff. That's what he writes about. I just read Lions of Al Rassan for the first time recently, and now it's one of my all-time favorite books. It blew me, just so beautiful.
What's the name?
Oh, his writing.
Lions.
Oh, wow.
Lions of Al Rassan. It's one of his standalones, and it left me speechless. It moved me in a way that I hadn't been moved since I read one of the Robin Hobb books that I hadn't read before. It was I found it just really powerful.
His writing is absolutely brilliant. I'm reading his works in publication order, and if Fiona Noir Tapestry is him at the beginning of his career, oh my god, I cannot wait to read what else he's done.
But he writes elevated prose, but it is very, very readable. I mean, that's what makes it such an incredible skill.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's like music in books. It's like listening to music, but you're actually reading. It's very, very beautiful. It's very different too from anything I've read.
I actually got because I've only read 2 canon of his, but it was, sometimes you get to the afterwards, you know, by the author, and kind of at the end they kind of brush over them. Sometimes it's just dedications. But I'd read Tigana, and he basically said he read Tigana because of a series of poems by a Northern Irish author called Brian Frieden called Translations. I get so emotional at that part because it sort of all made sense as to why I connected with a lot of the themes in that book, that kind of that belonging to a land but not belonging to a land, all of that kind of thing. And then somebody from Canada had written that. Like, I always think that outside lens onto, you know, my life or my experiences is just it just makes things so incredible. And it's such a skill in an author to be able to do that successfully.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I tended to get to one of Rick's questions because he had some just fantastic questions on the forum. So before we wrap up, I wanted to get one of his questions in because he has lots of great ones. I thought he has an interesting one here about what makes an ideal review for you as a reader. So interesting what everyone's opinion on that is. And thank you again, Rick, for the fantastic questions. So who wants to go first? Okay, I'll go first, I guess. For me, the ideal review for me as a reader, what usually gets me to buy a book are negative reviews. So whenever Paromita says this is too bleak for me, I'm like, okay, I'm going to buy that book. No, but it's great because whenever I see negative reviews, even on Goodreads, that people say this book is too violent, it's too dark.
Yeah,
I was depressed for a week. It's like, okay, that book's for me. So it's a good thing. Everyone has different opinions, so it's actually a compliment. And you have some great insights, Paromita. So, and you did give Friends of Nothing a try, so kudos for that. Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
it's not definitely not for everyone. I can, even though I like it, I can for sure say it's definitely not for everyone, and that's okay. Yeah.
I like a review to be analytical. I like to have some analysis in it as to why a certain thing works for you. So there's a couple of people that I think are very, very good at it. At giving broad strokes, but then honing in on just one little small bit that really connected them to it or made them turn them off because of it. And I usually find it's in the insight of that makes me think, that's for me or not, because the little that I do know about my own reading taste, I can kind of either make a decision based on the analysis rather than the kind of broad strokes, because broad strokes could be in anything.
I can go next. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Layla.
I was just going to say, I think my approach is a little different. I do look at how many people have responded to this book, like the number of people that have read it, and how many stars did it get, just to get a sense of what's going on. But I really don't, my first, the reason I choose a book has more to do with like a combination of, I guess the genre, if I've heard of the author, the book cover, and so it's really kind of subjective. I make decisions differently every time, because I like to read different kinds of books. I like historical fiction, and I like science fiction, fantasy, and all that. So just many things. But I listen to or read reviews after I've read the book because I want to expand my perspective on it, more than using them to make the decision, So like right now, I've just decided to read another book because I've got a sense of who wrote it, and it's probably going to be pretty cool. And so it just comes in different directions. Yeah.
I think I was going to say almost exactly the same thing, Layla. I read reviews after I finish books, and I think what I tend to focus on is mostly 5 stars and 1 star to see if people liked the book for the same reasons I did, or if I really liked a book, then how could anyone dislike it, and find things that they didn't like. And I think the ones that I appreciate the most are those that tend to stay objective and not, if they are, based on some misreading of the text or something that they have misinterpreted, then I would be upset by that review. But if not, if even for negative reviews of books I like or vice versa, if they largely stayed objective and, or were clear about things that were personal opinions as opposed to just like, making judgments on the book that this is bad because of reasons that are very individual and subjective, then those reviews bother me. But otherwise, yeah, I think it's good if you are good about stating opinions as opinions and stay largely objective.
I'll go then.
Go ahead.
I definitely think there are two kind of sides to it. Actually, there are probably more than that, but certainly like the reviews I read after I've read a book, and like often I'm reading those because either I want my opinion validated because I'm insecure, or or I'm looking for some new insight, where I'm like, oh, that person noticed something I didn't notice, or they appreciated something that I didn't appreciate, and now I suddenly have this broader, more nuanced perspective of work, and often appreciate it more. But if I'm looking for something to read, a few things. This may be vapid, but I like when a review is like fun to read, or to watch or something, where there's a level of like personality or humor or anything. I guess that's the entertainment aspect of it. Yeah. But otherwise, too, certainly, like Chris said, the analytical perspective, if the reviewer can kind of explain why they like the things, they didn't just say they like it, they thought it was great, they're like, the characters are great, well, like, why, like, what is it about the characters that you found compelling, if they talk about prose, that's usually a good sign for me, because a lot of readers don't care, and so when they do, that tends to be like, okay, like these are my people, and that helps sort of figure things out. When they talk about themes, that's another big thing, and not just in sort of the broadest sense, but like can actually like maybe discuss things in a little more detail. Like I think that's always something I appreciate, is when they it's not just the movie's about sadness, it's like, oh, the movie's about like processing our grief in the wake of blah blah blah, when I feel like, yeah, they've really, the reviewer has analyzed, the work and processed their own feelings and can like explain that often I find is more helpful than just something very broad.
I love thematic reviews.
Yeah.
Thematics are the bit that I really love in books. When a book tells a story, but you come away from going, that actually might have been about something else. That could have been somebody's personal grief in there. You get to the end of it and then kind of think about it, or it could be about, capitalism or whatever it is on the side. Love that stuff.
100%.
Paromita?
I don't have a lot to add more than what has been said. It's a little bit of all of those things. I do love a good rant review, and I'm thoroughly entertained by them in written and video form. But I wouldn't say I make I take book recommendations from them. They are usually for things that I will avoid, and then I just watch people go, what the hell is going on? And I'm like, yes, I feel you. But for book recommendations, it's mostly what everyone else said.
And before we wrap up, I wanted to ask Carl, and time just got away from us, but how long do you think the strikes will last? Because you have some, if you had to guess, just curious of what your feeling is about the whole thing.
My answer is definitely different now than it was a week or two ago, because the Writers Guild is negotiating again. They've just gone back to the table with
right.
AMT, or as it is, the studios came back to the table finally, and that is really good news. I don't think it's going to be an overnight thing. On top of that, they have to negotiate with SAG. So I am cautiously optimistic for October for everything to be back up and running. Um, Maybe like mid to late October. I think it's possible it takes as long as December. I don't think the strike will still be happening in the new year. I mean, at a certain point, they've just bled so much cash that like they have to get things back up and running. You're seeing that more and more as time goes on. That like Wall Street increasingly, and a bunch of these big financiers are like, you have to stop. You have to make a deal. Like something has to happen because this can't keep going.
It feels like this is one of the most, for creatives in all industries, this feels like one of the most important strikes that I can ever remember. This is a just strike. This isn't just about pay. This is about the very act of creativity and how it's perceived, I think.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you said that, Chris, and I think that that's something anyone who's listening or watching, that this really is important, really important, and especially if I can tell you I think it is beyond just this industry. I mean, I think it's true in a sense of like labor movements too, that we're seeing a return of like unions having more power, and I think more and more people are unionizing, both in and outside of Hollywood. But that it really is about the future of the profession and the future of creation, and where things were headed was, speaking to like TV writing specifically, I can say like it was going to stop being a real career for most people. And if the writers don't get a majority, like really the key things that they're looking for, it will no longer be a real career path except for like the top. And it's already, so hard to break in. And like you can only imagine if like you can actually be writing, but it's like a gig economy and you're making $40,000 a year, and so you're having to work in something else too, and then it's that much harder to take meetings, and so it's really important. It is, and I mean, God, for actors, arguably even more so, because they're taking their likenesses, and wanting to just own it in perpetuity. So this is a huge deal, and I think certainly the guilds are aware of that.
Interesting times for sure. lots of times. I feel like we can go on for another few hours, but I know all of you have lives to live. So, but before we go, Chris, can you tell us where people can find you?
You can find me on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, or you can find me on Varsha channel tomorrow and on Sunday as well, I believe as well. Or you can find me on Twitter, X. Oh, no, you can't. I don't post anything. What am I talking about? That's absolute nonsense. Find me on the page Tune Forums is the next best place.
Nice. And Carl, where can people find you and your work?
So my work is, if you want the ebook, that is on Amazon exclusively. The paperback, there is no hardback, but the paperback you can buy through any service, Amazon included. You can also get it at like Barnes and Noble or Waterstones, I think, too, in the UK. Or I distribute through Ingram Spark, so they distribute widely, so you can get that wherever. And then in terms of like my socials, I'm on Twitter and Instagram, both I believe at Carl D. Albert, and then I think I'm on TikTok too. I post TikToks occasionally if the kids are on the TikToks. I believe I'm also Carl D. Albert there. Maybe Carl D. Albert author. I don't know. I'm trying that out. So, yeah, and definitely the Page Chewing Forums, which is a great community that I'm so happy to have stumbled into.
Yeah, this is great to have you there. Really appreciate it. And Paromita, where can people find you and your wonderful insights? And you always have the best questions. Seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
I just want to thank everyone for letting me be a part of the panel. I'm on the Page Chewing Forums almost every day, and you can read me complain about stuff there. I don't
No,
complain
not
that
at all.
much.
Hardly at all. Was it as bad as you thought it would be? Because I know you're a little bit nervous. What are your thoughts after now that we're wrapping up?
I mean, it was delightful, but I hope I didn't jabber on for too long. I always don't know what I'm doing. So, but thank you, everyone. I just want to thank everyone on the panel for letting
No,
me
it's
be a part.
that's what this is about, is just jabbering and just nonsense. So no worries. I don't know what I'm talking about, so you don't worry about that. So, and Layla.
Thank you, Paromita, by the way.
Yeah.
That was you. I thought it was great. I mean, everyone here, I thought had great questions and insights and everything. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Definitely.
and Paromita, I liked your first blog. I think
Yes.
you have a with all of your knowledge, I think you can put that to good use in blogging and writing. And I can be found on Twitter and Instagram and at Goushey or at Validine Magazine. So, and of course on page 2.
And Varsha's going to be busy the next few months. I can guarantee we have lots of things happening over on Varsha's channel. I almost feel bad because we have so many things planned, and I don't want to overwhelm you.
Oh, I please do. I love reading together, and it's been one of my favorite things to do. The last few months have been my best reading time. But yes, you can find me on Reading by the Rainy Mountain. That's my YouTube channel, and the About page has other ways to reach me. And we have a lot of reading groups coming up soon. It's almost scary how many.
Lots of stuff. And I'm glad you mentioned, Layla, I'm glad you mentioned Paramita's blog sheet is blogging for page tuning. So very wonderful first post. So great job, Paramita. So thank you for doing that as well. Cool. Well, thank you everyone for coming by, and hope everyone listening has a fantastic weekend, and we will see everyone very soon.